Hello and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Hey, Maddie, always great to hang out with you.
It is always lovely to hang out with you. And as you know, because you have been a multiple time guest, and I think everybody knows you, rather than reading your bio one more time, I am now asking repeat guests to share one piece of information about themselves that our listeners might not know about.
Okay, so here's a fun one. Even though I write horror and ghost stories and books for writers and stuff like that, my very first professional sale, where I actually got money and a copy of the magazine or the book that it was in, was a YA humor story in 1992. And it was kind of funny because it's called The Progressive Sidetrack, and it is about a guy who has this goal, but he ends up spending the whole story getting sidetracked doing all these other things.
I can
And
imagine as a young writer, that would be an appropriate thing to write about.
that was my life.
Yeah.
It still is my life, actually. And then even that was the basis for the story that became A Canadian Werewolf in New York, is he's trying to get to a destination and he ends up getting sidetracked helping people while all he really needs to do is this thing, but he doesn't do any of that. And that's what makes it the story. And that's what makes it humorous. And that's what makes it, fun to write.
Yeah. Is that something that people can still find?
You know, what's funny is The Progressive Sidetrack. I've never reprinted that. I've never republished that. I have been considering putting together, because I have written some YA pieces, and I was considering putting it together in a collection of YA stories that are actually family-friendly stories. And that could probably be where, maybe I've been holding on to it. Maybe that's where it'll end up.
Yeah. Well, that would be fun. So, Mark, you are here because we are celebrating the 300th episode of the Indie Author Podcast.
And I didn't even make a cake or anything for this event.
You
The
can send me
candles would have been just a fire hazard, right?
you can send me a virtual cake. But I think we started this, you ended up on episode 100. It was landmark episode 100. And
Yeah.
you've been here many times since then. But in episode 200, which aired in August of 2023, we were talking kind of, I believe, about how things had changed in the previous 100 episodes.
Right.
And we're going to be revisiting that again. So we're going to be talking about what's changed in the indie publishing landscape since August of 2023.
Wow.
And just to give us some context, I thought we'd sort of use a variation of the Alliance of Independent Authors processes of publishing. But Mark, do you have any general thoughts before we dive into some details about what has changed since 2023?
General thoughts, just as we begin, is you think about that. It was 2 years ago, roughly, right? A couple,
Yep.
give or take a couple months. And so much changes in such a small time period. It's a reminder to us to remember, that's not always the way it is. I was talking to an author yesterday about a tactic that used to work on a particular river platform. And it was like, oh no, that tactic hasn't worked since, and I go back 12 years, 15 years, that kind of thing. And it's amazing how dramatic things can change in such a short time period.
I think that the one thing that hasn't changed, and we don't want to focus on things that haven't changed, but the one thing I think has not changed in the entire time I've been studying indie publishing since 2013 has been the importance of email lists. That was the top thing in 2013, and I think it is still one of those pieces of advice, having an email list that hasn't changed since then.
And it's good to mention it though, Maddie, because it is one of those consistents, and it's the value of you owning your list, of you knowing and being in contact directly with your readers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one of the things that has sort of prompted change is this idea of not relying on third parties, and especially for indie authors, being in control of your publishing journey.
Yeah.
And I imagine we're going to encounter a couple of examples of that during our conversation.
Perhaps.
But 5 of the 7 processes of publishing that I thought we could talk about during our conversation are design, production, distribution, marketing, and promotion. And I wanted to start out with design. What are you seeing in the design world? And by design, I mean both your interior and exterior design, cover design, that has changed in the last 2 years.
Well, I think one of the most significant updates, and even Vellum just announced that recently in the last week or so, was the design for special editions.
Yeah.
Right? Like the design isn't just having a book that looks like a professional book from a traditional publisher, right? Vellum, Atticus, Draft to Digital, all these templates and stuff like that. But there are new companies on the market. I'm experimenting with one where you can just use a regular printer like, Ingram Spark or Lightning Source or Print on Demand or whatever. and the way that you design the file with a bleed interior and just stuff that's on the edge of the book, you can actually make those colored edges and with designs on. And just to understand, so there's two different settings when you do print on demand. I think this is an important thing for authors to understand. So bleed, it goes all the way to the edge of the page. And
Yep.
typically by default, there's no bleed and you
Yep.
can't have any text or any printing outside of this little margin that's like what, half an inch or a quarter of an inch or whatever.
Yep.
But when you have the bleeds, what they've done is they're using the bleed dimensions to put little blackness, like darkness, black ink on the edge so that you suddenly can have a pattern there.
Yeah. That's very
I'm
cool.
about to experiment with doing an edition of this book. It's going to have black with skulls.
Oh, good. Well, I think that whole idea, I'm trying to think if 2023 was sort of a turning point, but I know definitely in the last 2 years, I've seen a lot more emphasis on the ability to create those beautiful print editions, and far from ebooks being the end of print, I think that one of the results of ebooks is that the people who love to hold a book in their hands, authors, indie authors are seeing opportunities to make that experience even cooler for them, and there are just now, you go to author events and you see these vendors with their booths and you look at the books and they're just works of art.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the design principles we're seeing is a return to the love of the physical object. I know Johnny B. Truant is going to be launching a book called The Artisan Author.
Yep.
I'm reading an early copy of that book that's coming out later this year. And as I'm reading it, I was like, yes, authors are finally getting it. Print never died. It just had beautiful little digital babies.
Yeah, I think that when this goes out, be on the podcast talking about the artisan author just a couple of episodes before this one. So,
So
yeah,
go back and listen to episode, what insert it's something less than 300.
it should be episode 298.
There we go, 298. So you will
Um,
already have heard from Johnny about that.
yeah, well, I think that that emergence of the concept of the artisan author, and which is ironically sort of the other end of write, publish, repeat, which was, one of Johnny's early positions about how you can make a living as an author.
Yeah.
I think that turn had started before 2023, but it is certainly continuing on. And I think it's both proving to be good business for a lot of authors, but also kind of a relief to a lot of authors.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that you don't have to do it fast.
Yeah.
One thing that was kind of interesting, and Johnny addresses this, and he probably would have said this already, but that write, publish, repeat is it was never meant to be rapid write, publish, repeat. It's just meant to be keep doing it. And this,
Yeah, I think that one of the changes that I've seen, and this is actually on the traditional publishing side, is that idea of taking care of your backlist and how your backlist can sell your new books and your new books sell your backlist. And
yeah,
one thing I'm seeing in traditional publishing is that they're starting to realize that. There was just a quote from the CEO of Hachette saying that they were sort of switching their model to focus less on the big blockbuster, the tentpole books, and
yeah.
trying to have all their energy focused around a launch and moving toward the idea that a long life of a book was what they also were looking for, which is certainly what indie authors are looking for.
Oh, for sure. 100%. 100%. And Maddie, I thought I would surprise you since it's your 300th episode, is that this episode will be going live after the fact. But next week, when I'm in Philadelphia, I have created this catalog of indie author books for Draft to Digital. And what I've done is I've put together. So one of the things you may notice is the series starters.
Yes, look at that.
I got the two first Lizzie Ballard thrillers there for libraries because you've distributed, I think, all of the library platforms through Draft to Digital. And
Yep.
I thought, oh, cool. These are the tips for librarians to say, hey, go check out this series. And I just did books 1 and 2 because, if they check them out and they love them, then they know there's more.
That's
There you
fantastic.
go. So,
You're the
I
best,
did
Mark.
that. I was looking for good titles. And ironically, I think I saw either you posted on Facebook or it was an ad for a 99-cent book or whatever. And I went, oh, those are stunning. Let's put them in the catalog. And there was
Yeah,
that serendipitous moment of going, ooh, are these available to most library platforms? Yes, they are. Oh, okay. Well, include it in catalog. So
very cool.
yeah, hopefully by the time this airs, libraries will be ordering. But you also, and this, I know this is an aside, but you also don't price your library books very cheap. I think I have $29.99
Yes.
as the library price there. So it's more in line with, it's still cheaper than what traditional publishers are doing. It's more in line with what the libraries are used to in terms of really expensive library ebooks, and that's the ebook edition.
Yeah, I felt that was a good balance between I mean, for a long time, I just had my books I was selling my books to libraries for the same amount that I would sell, like, an individual copy to an individual person, and I think
Yeah,
both authors and libraries realize that maybe that's not the best business decision, but then the big names are selling them for multiples of 29.99, so,
yeah,
yeah, I was trying to hit that point where it was optimizing it financially for me and still making it attractive to the libraries.
yeah. So another strategy we're sneaking in there, a little Maddie Dalrymple strategy.
Yeah. Well, the other strategy I was thinking that might have changed for some people since 2023 is just that idea of having a longer backlist, the longer time that goes by, the more books you have in the backlist and the more you can capitalize on them for each book offering that stream of income for an indie author.
Yeah, that's true.
So let's talk about we've talked a little bit about production in the sense of, producing the beautiful designs that are becoming more and more possible. Are there other changes in the production process that you've seen over the last couple of years?
Well, this is like the second time it's come and gone. Serialization. Like early in, and you go back to Johnny back when he was working with Sean and Dave and they were doing serial. They were serializing in the sales platform by doing regular short releases, week after week after week or month after month after month. And then they would have like a series, just like a TV series. But Vela, they launched Vela at some point, and I think in 2 years ago, it was still relatively popular, and then it off again.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder to me, as the old timer in the room here, that we're gonna see trends come and go, right? And I'm so glad you talked about this already with it, publishers focusing on just the trendy books and not the stable backlist or not the whole catalog. Like,
Yeah.
why do you bother publishing 100 books when only 10 of them you do any marketing for? Like,
Yeah.
why are you wasting that time and energy and the hopes and dreams of all these people?
Yeah.
Not just the author. I'm talking about the sales reps and the booksellers who end up bringing the books in and then buying lots of copies and going, well, this was a dud because there's no marketing behind it. So I think it's that important reminder as we look at the trend and say, yes, trends will come and go, but what can you do as an author that's not necessarily having to follow the trends? Because you can never predict what the next thing is going to be.
Well, I like that idea of you calling out how Amazon was behind cereals for a while with Vella and then not. And I remember similarly, this was even a few years before 2023, there was this sort of push on Amazon to have short fiction more front and center. And
Yeah.
so it was easier. I think this is probably still out there, but it's just not as easy to find that you could go on Amazon, you could find short fiction, and then you could find short fiction for a particular period of time. Like, let's say you were on your lunch break and you wanted something that you could read in half
Yeah.
an hour, you could find the books that Amazon believed, were 20-minute reads or 40-minute reads or hour and a
Yeah.
half reads or whatever. And, as I said, I think it may be still out there, but you really have to dig to find that information as a reader.
Yeah.
And the idea, I'm kind of harking back now to what you said about Johnny and his cohorts doing sort of the equivalent for serialization. Like I see a lot of people, a lot of indie authors taking these ideas that maybe the third party retail platforms have come and gone from, but finding ways to do it themselves.
Yeah, like hacking the existing system. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be used this way, but I'm gonna use it this way.
Yeah.
And it's so funny when you talk about short fiction. I'm going back, it was like 2008 or so, 2009-ish, when the company that became Kobo was first launched as a spin-off from a retailer here in Canada. And the name of the company was called Short Covers. Do you remember this? Or
No.
you and I remember seeing Mike Serbinis, who was the original CEO of Kobo. He used to be the head of IT for Indigo, which is kind of like a Barnes& and Noble here in Canada. And it was at an industry event. And I was there thinking about print on demand and the espresso book machine that I had in my store. And I was excited about it. So I'm there talking about that. And he's there and he announced Short Covers. It was this cool company because it was the first time, actually, while he was doing his talk, I created a free account, loaded a short story, and I published it. It was live before his talk ended. I turned to my buddy and go, look, while he was talking, I just published a book on the platform he just launched. Their belief was that if people are reading on devices like phones and stuff like that, they're not going to read full novels. They're only going to read short stories. And
Interesting.
their initial belief was that people wouldn't read anything that more than an hour. And short covers within a year or two of that then realized, no, people do want to read full life books. And that's when Kobo, which is an anagram for book, that's when the company was officially changed to Kobo back then. There, a little bit of trivia history for you.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I think it highlights the benefit. Like there was a publishing company that pivoted to accommodate that, but certainly indie authors can pivot much more quickly. If they're
Yeah.
hearing one contingent say, I don't think people will read for more than an hour on their Kindle, and they don't think that's true, then there
Yeah.
are ways to get around that if you're using your own platforms and
Right.
being inventive about how you capitalize on them.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's move on to distribution, the other
Yeah.
side of production. I think that one thing that I've heard about, and maybe you can comment on this, is bookshop.org moving into ebooks.
Yes.
Is there anything you can share on that development?
Yeah, I'll give you an insider result. Maddie, I actually signed on behalf of Drafted Digital. I signed the contract with them in September of 2023.
Oh my gosh.
It was funny when they finally announced ebooks and that Drafted Digital was a partner. The indie audiobooks are not there yet.
Yeah.
That they're probably going to be getting there by the end of this year.
Mhm.
It's taken them a significant, longer time to get in ebooks for a few different reasons. They had to have a good app. Also, Amy, who I used to work with at Kobo, she used to be the US rep back in the early days of Kobo. It's good to know that they've got someone solid like her. And so that's a really great thing. But yeah, it was so funny to go, wow, that was 2 years ago. We signed the contract to distribute to them. Now we did test. I have a whole bunch of my books were live for a little while because in the testing, I didn't realize it was going to a test environment. I usually will put my books and stuff into that environment because I'm one of the early alpha testers for most new platforms. And I was like, lo and behold, oops, my books are live. I guess they didn't have a beta area that wasn't published to the website. They just went live. But yeah, so that should be happening either over the course of the summer or the early fall when indie author ebooks are going to be available on bookshop.org. And just from the point of view, I've always, with books2read.com, the bookshop.org, well, the ebook thing exists now. You can add links to ebooks from bookshop.org. So my traditionally published books there, but also the print book links. And that's been a significant, I mean, they launched in 2020, right? Just as they were needed and have raised so much money to support independent bookstores. And I cannot wait until I can say you can buy my ebooks and you can have the money go to your favorite local independent bookstore. But in general, every purchase you make goes to a pool that helps fund independent bookstores. I'm so excited about that.
Yeah. I can imagine that that could provide a really interesting alternative. I mean, it could obviously provide an interesting addition, but also an alternative to people who maybe don't feel like messing with setting up their own direct sales store and
Yeah.
they're focused less on the royalties and more on relationship building and the
Yeah.
marketing opportunities to be able to say, in cases where you might otherwise encourage readers to go to your direct sales store, encourage them to go to bookshop.org for all the good reasons you just mentioned. And then
Yeah.
bookshop.org is taking care of it. And the other reason I really like that is this idea that, you send a reader to your own platform, like I use PayHip, that's great, but they're only seeing my books. Whereas if you send them to a place like bookshop.org,
Yeah.
they're seeing your book in the context of all the other books like it, and
Right.
that has some
Yes.
nice promotional and marketing benefits.
But in addition, Maddie, you as an author can create an affiliate account with bookshop.org and leverage their entire catalog, which
Yeah,
is basically most books that are available in the English language in print.
yeah,
And then you also get an affiliate cut. So again, they can go and buy your books, but they can buy any book in the world and you get some money and independent bookstores get some money too. So it's a win-win-win situation too. And again,
yes,
it saves you having to build a giant catalog and having to manage that. And, even with PayHip, which is relatively easy to do, there's a number of steps you have to do and then connect it to your book funnel account. And,
yeah,
you know, so trying to manage a big catalog is really hard. You either need a team or you have to dedicate a bit of time to it. But with something like bookshop.org, okay, you're not making, 95% on those sales, but you also didn't have to waste or invest, I should say, a whole whack of time in this.
yeah. So I'm going to move on to the last two categories that we want to talk about, marketing and promotion. And so from Ally's point of view, marketing is those things that you do all the time. They're the ongoing sort of foundational activities that you undergo. Those would be things like maintaining your email list and maintaining your website and as Ally likes to say, it's sort of like the hand you reach out to the reader to introduce you and your books to them. Do you see any big changes in the marketing area over the last 2 years?
I think a lot of the marketing efforts have well, Amazon's become even more of a pay to play system, right? I mean, yes, it's possible to just have books on Amazon without having to pay money to fight to get your book in front of more people, but it almost feels like it's way more pay to play than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge there. But there are other options, of course, book club ads, which you can link to all the places, including your own site. Facebook ads have continued to be prominent as well. I've seen a lot more efforts directed back to something we've already discussed, and that's direct sales. I think a lot more marketing and even promotion efforts, like both of them, have been towards, all right, if I'm going to spend money on a Facebook ad, I'm going to make it a digital box set of this, whatever, at a really high price so that the dollars I'm investing aren't returning me 35 cents. They're returning me $18 or whatever that case may be. If it's a full, like the full series or something like that. And I think we're seeing a bit of that. We've also seen the growth. The other thing, I've always been a big fan of written word media ever since first meeting Ricky and Farrell, all those many years ago, back in, oh, wow, 2013 or 14 or 15 or something like that. When we were all hanging out with Brian Cohen and Jim Kukrill and Joanna Pan and Ricky and Farrell. I love the picture of all of us in this lobby at this conference. And I love how they have built in, it used to just be, bargain booksy and free booksy, right? But now they have the promo stacks. I've got promos going on in July where it's like, okay, I've got the bargain booksy and I got the e-reader news today and I've got the Hello books and I've got
Yep.
the other promo. And so just by logging into a single account, I've saved time by being able to manage a stack. And I would normally used to go and, okay, I'm going to run this promo for 7 days, and day one's going to be my newsletter, and day two is going to be Bargain Booksy, and day three is going to be e-reader news today, and day four is going to be blah, blah, blah. Now it takes me about 45 minutes less time because I only have to go to one site.
Yeah.
And so a company that has built its company on promoting and promotions has incorporated something authors were manually doing, which is the promo stacks. So I love when companies see the need in the author community and build it. Damon Courtney does that all the time with BookFunnel. Oh, authors need this? I mean, that's what BookFunnel was built for. He was at the Smarter Artist Summit in Austin, and people were complaining about, how do I give books to my readers? It's too complicated. I don't know how to walk them through how to sideload to a Kindle. And then Damon, who was an epic fantasy writer, stopped being a writer and went back to his other passion for code and said, I'm going to build a solution for that. And he said it in his loud Damon voice. And ever since then, BookFunnel is a perfect example of a company that listens to what authors need and what authors are doing, and then gives them the tools they need to make it easier to do that. Seen quite a bit of that in the last couple of years too.
Yeah, I want to, as our closing question, we're not there yet, but as our closing question, I realized that I'd love to hear your thoughts on what do we not see yet that we would like to send out into the world to ask people that when we get together for Landmark episode 400, we can talk about, oh, look, this came up in the last 2 years. But so many things came up as you were talking through that. One is that I realized, and now I'm going back way more than 2 years, but I realized that when I indie published my first book in 2013, having it on Amazon was sort of like a seal of legitimacy from certain readers, because I think that readers didn't, I mean, sometimes even the writers didn't know about indie publishing. It was quite new. And I think that when people heard that somebody had published their own book, they thought that they had just, gotten a bunch of books printed that were sitting in the trunk of the car. And if you told people that your books were on Amazon, it was kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, then it must be a legitimate book. And obviously, we have evolved way past that. But I think both authors have evolved way past that, and readers have evolved way past that. And obviously, much more so than in 2013. But even 2 years ago, I think that if a reader heard that their favorite author was now only selling through their own platform, they would recognize that that's a legitimate business decision.
Mm.
It's not that they couldn't sell it somewhere else, it was that they recognize, oh, authors have all these different options now, and I'm not going to judge based on what well-known third-party retail platforms they are or are not on. So I think that has been a big help both on the reader side and the author side.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, because when did Brandon Sanderson normalize the Kickstarter? Like is it to get these early editions, you got to get them from me. I mean, come on, Stephen King did it in 1999 with writing, was it Writing the Bullet? That was the ebook story that he would email
Uh,
direct.
I
He
don't
emailed,
know.
and I
Now I have to
remember
look that up.
subscribing directly to him, well, to his company or whatever, and getting this serialized email story, like early days. I think Writing the
Interesting.
Bullet was the first experiment with an actual ebook,
Uh-huh.
but that was independent, and it was ahead of its day.
Yeah.
There weren't really good ebook readers in 1999. There were ebook readers, and I think Sony came up with the first relatively decent one,
Yeah.
what, 6 or 7 years later?
Yeah, but it was probably a lot of people reading on PDF or just reading from their email
It was just the
page.
story came in email, and I don't think he ever finished the plant. I think that was the story, and it was a really good story, and I was like, I never saw that come back, which is weird, because
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty I mean, come on, it's King. He kinda knows a thing or two about writing. I
Well,
suspect he's a
interestingly,
decent writer.
well, I've said this a couple of times, and I feel like at some point somebody on the Stephen King team will come across this in Google and hear me saying this. But at some point, I'm going to get up the nerve to get in touch with Stephen King and invite him on the podcast to answer one question, which is, what do people think they should do because they saw it worked for you? That with your experience looking back, you can now say, don't do that because that worked in 1999, or I really wish I hadn't done that, or something like that. Because there's so many people out there, they read on writing and they say, oh, well, this is the Stephen King formula. So I'm going to do this and I'm going to become as successful as Stephen King. And I've got to believe that Stephen King's going, oh, no, no, that's not really what I meant.
Yeah.
Or I meant that years ago and I wouldn't mean it anymore.
Yeah, well, or he meant it, but the reality is that for every 100 people who do it, 1 or 2 will actually find success,
Yeah.
and it has nothing to do with their talent or how hard they tried. It's that unknown factor that nobody ever likes to admit. "Oh, by the way, I also got lucky," which
Yeah.
you can't control, you can't game.
Yeah.
So,
Another thing I thought about Amazon was that has changed fairly recently is this idea that Amazon changed the lower limit for print books that will enable you to earn the higher royalty level. So I think it's 9.99. I only had one print book under 9.99, which was my novella. I went and I changed it to 9.99 so I could earn higher
yeah.
royalties. But that idea of keeping track of what are the changing business rules that the retail platforms are legitimately putting into place, that's always a moving target. Any thoughts about anything in that sphere?
Well, you know what? It's a reminder to authors. Here's the challenge and the frustration I've had with authors. I get frustrated at authors all the time. And it's almost like getting frustrated when you watch the child reaching for the hot element on the stove. I love you so much. I'm angry at you right now because I told you not to do this.
Yeah.
And I think authors got it into their heads that they weren't good enough, or that they needed to price low in order to get, to attract readers and stuff, which can work really well with ebooks, especially first in series or that gateway book that gets them, okay, try me out for less, and then now you'll know I'm worth it.
Yeah.
And I don't think authors have fully embraced recognizing that they are worth it. They're worth more than they're giving their books up for. When it comes to print, they're trying to play that same idiotic game of pricing to the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
And you can't do that in print because there's so many other fingers in the pie. There's a whole 2 hands in the pie, not just fingers.
Yeah.
A lot of that margin's taken up. I mean, on my print books, I make a little bit more on my print books than I make on my traditional books, right? You know what I mean? So that because of fingers in the pie, it's just the reality of the economics. And Amazon was, I think, losing. I know Draft to Digital, for the first 2 years of Draft Digital print, lost money with every book sale.
Believe it.
Basically said it was trying to establish the business and make it affordable for authors, and wasn't making enough money because the volume was so low. Lost money for 2 years. And I know Amazon's probably either only been making pennies or losing money on their print books. So I'm so glad that they made that change, because ironically, a lot of authors need Amazon to kick them in the head in order to change their behavior. Amazon's forcing them now to price their books higher because they want to make more money, or they're going to lose money or whatever because the margin's so small. So I'm glad, because you cannot sell print books for the same low prices. You have to bring them in line with what the market will bear. And let's be honest, the cost of paper, like I remember running a print on demand business in 2009, and I was buying paper by the skid. So I was very conscious of the cost of paper because I was running a print on demand business. And for years, the cost of paper did not go up. The cost of paper in the last 6 to 7 years has gone up more in the last 6 to 7 years than it did in the previous 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And so Amazon and everyone was raising their prices. Like, every 6 months, Ingram's like, oh, the prices are up. Well, guess what? Because the cost of paper's gone up. They have to do this. But Amazon has those same costs and they never raise their prices. So this is obviously their way of making a smart business move so they can actually make more money, but also trying potentially to encourage the industry to stop undervaluing print books.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll get off that a little stool in my there's a little soapbox there.
So we sort of lapsed into promotion, I think, with some of that conversation, promotion being the last area that I wanted to hit before we get to the what do we want to see coming up in the next 100 episode time frame. Are there any things you've seen changing over the last 2 years for promotion, separate from marketing, that you think are worth calling out?
I think any of the promotions where they're targeting people to come back to my store rather than someone else's store, I
Yeah.
think has been a significant one. Authors are becoming a little bit more savvy because they have their own stores now and they go, oh, wait, when I sell this myself, I make this amount of margin. So I
One of the
think, yeah, that's one of the strategies I've seen more prominent.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen over the last 2 years in the promotion area is with BookBub. As a reader, I get the daily
Yeah.
BookBub feature deals mail for thrillers, mystery, and suspense. And how many of those slots are taken up with backlist traditional
Yeah.
published authors? And I
Yeah.
think this is an area where, for many, many years, the indie authors were learning from the traditional publishing market. And I think this is an area where the traditional publishers are learning from the indies, realizing this idea of caring for your backlist and the benefits it can still provide.
Yeah.
I look at my behavior as a recipient of those emails and I see why BookBub is doing it because I would see like Hotel New Hampshire or Pride and Prejudice or these books. I was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to have that in my library, and I would get it for $1.99 or whatever. Also, the prices they're marking it down to are higher than they used to be. I totally understand why BookBub is doing this. I can see they're still reserving certain, some number of slots for indies, but it used to be all indies. If you go back a certain number of years, it was something that only indie authors were using, and it was
Yeah.
all indies. And so, from a promotional point of view, one of the things I've done is I've moved away from applying for feature deals, which are getting really expensive, and I'm focusing more on BookBub ads because I do love the idea of
Yeah.
BookBub. I love the idea of promoting somewhere where people are
Yeah.
actually going to look for books as opposed to Facebook, where,
Yeah.
that's not why they're on Facebook. But just those changes in how the publishing industry is moving, both indie and traditional, has made that kind of a different promotional platform than it was 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, and that's been since the beginning of the book club. I mean, in the early days, and that actually when it was affordable, but that's the challenge is you get these multinational publishers who are willing to pay a lot more because they'll pay a lot more than a book club ad for a New York subway ad for a month. That's way more expensive. So
Yes.
they can run 30 book club ads probably for the same cost, actually have measurable results.
Yeah,
They
well,
go, "Oh, look, we moved the needle," as opposed to like, "Well, we have an ad somewhere in New York." And so they're getting more savvy with digital marketing. I'm surprised. I'm surprised how much they still have their heads stuck up their own behinds and not recognizing the power of digital. I know why. I know it's because they make billions of dollars in print, and the print business is still way bigger than the ebook business. I know indie authors do not believe that, but that is the reality of why we think they're idiots. But
it
they're making all their money shipping dead trees around.
yeah,
But they could make even more money by leveraging digital. And thank goodness, because we still own that space
yes.
we still own a significant chunk of that space. We used to own 80 to 90% of that space. Now it's dwindling. And I think indie authors are seeing those trends. They're saying, oh, the things I used to do don't work the same, right? Because they no longer own most of the space. That space there's a lot more competition from bigger publishers who have way deeper pockets. But let's be honest, we have our competition also in those ads, in those areas. are also indie authors with deep pockets because they're bringing in seven figures. So spending $10,000 or 30,000 or $100,000 a month on ads is
Yeah.
nothing to them.
Yeah. It's definitely becoming big business. I mean, there are enough indie authors out there now that are making these huge paydays to the extent that one can tell from, what one reads and
Yeah.
online or hears about when you hear them speaking. But yeah, that are really applying both the creativity but also the business savvy to
Yeah.
make those really successful. And I wanted to use your comment about sending out dead trees as an entree to a wrap up conversation about what would we like to see coming when we get together for landmark episode 400. And I would love to see the espresso book machine come back. And can you describe what the espresso book machine is?
So the espresso book machine is a machine that's maybe the last iteration of it I saw. The one I had was way bigger, but the last iteration I saw was it was maybe 5 feet by 2.5, 3 feet, and it would be about this high. So what, about 4 feet high,
Kind of
and
like a copy, like a large
like a
copier.
large copy machine. But it
Okay.
was also it was basically a couple printers. It was a color duplex printer, and it was also a high volume, high speed, black and white, high quality printer. And you would load a book block, the interior of a file, interior of a book, and the cover flat. And it would print and bind a book in about 15 minutes right there in the store. It actually would take the interior book block, it would print it. The robot arms would take it and it would run it over a spinning blade that would rough the edges. And then it would go over a glue pot. When you walk into, if you're in New York and you go to Shakespeare and Company, the minute I walked in, I'm like, oh, I know that smell. It's the hot glue. And then it runs the little circular wheel is moving the glue, and it just does this layer of glue, takes it over, drops it into the book cover, presses it together really tight for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then it trims off the edges because it uses the same size for everything. And the book comes out the machine and it's warm still because of the printing and the glue. And this was a technology that I invested 170,000 US in a bookstore in Canada, at McMaster University bookstore when I was there. We saved students $2.3 million in textbooks because we were doing custom editions of textbooks in collaboration with the publishers, where the professor would say, well, I want this textbook, but I only want these 6 chapters. You don't need all 30 chapters. And then they would send us a book block and a custom cover version for that. So we were able to, instead of them spending $200 on a textbook where I only read 25% of it, they would read 100% of it and it would only cost $35. And so the students were happy because they didn't have to buy something that was outrageous. They actually used it. And the publishers were happy because they didn't get returns because we were making them on demand. And so, yeah, that's the espresso book machine. But I love the idea
I love the idea
because
too.
you only manufacture what you need as opposed,
Yes.
because the book industry still, and again, this started over 100 years ago, did that because of the Great Depression. That's when publishers said, tell you what, bookstores, we'll take them back if you don't sell them.
Yeah.
We'll bear all the risk. And the industry has still been built on that. And I would love to see, I know it's probably not going to happen in 2 years, but I would love to see the attitude about print on demand change. I would love to see the accessibility of the ability to manufacture stuff locally as opposed to shipping things. Ebooks solve that problem in a significant way when you think about it.
Mm.
But I still think with the love of print books and the way the technology is going and the quality of a espresso book machine book was decent. It was near close. It was very close to a trade paperback, but it didn't have the protective finish on it and other things. So like it was near that. So imagine with the technology, if we applied it the way places like Book Vault and stuff can do this, imagine being able to print special editions like that.
Yeah. And what intrigues me about this is the idea of the reader being able to choose. Like maybe they just want the latest James Patterson novel or whatever because they're going to on their way to the airport and they need something to read on
Mhm.
the plane. Maybe they're buying a birthday present for someone who's a huge James Patterson fan and they want it in hardcover with like, the gilded
Yeah.
edges or whatever and a jacket. And I can imagine that over time, people won't have to wait 15 minutes. But on the other hand, if you just put a nice cafe in the bookstore, you pick the
Yeah.
book you want, you go sit in the cafe and drink your espresso for 15 minutes, and then you go back to the espresso book machine and pick up your book. I just think that would be so great because it does make me cringe when I think about how many books end up in landfills because the publisher miscalculated, it's
Yeah.
the demand or whatever it might be.
Well, but even think about real estate, right? Like, think about an airport bookstore and how small it is, and they can only carry certain things. You're like, yeah, but Del Griffith, perfect example from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. The reason he's reading a pornographic novel in the film and that scene was cut was he said, I travel so much, I've read everything. So now
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
reading this,
yeah,
right? So imagine that you do have the standard ones that are high volume in demand, the James Pattersons and stuff like the new ones, but he's got a huge backlist. You're like, no, I want the first Patterson in that series. And you go to the machine and it comes out.
yeah,
You're like, ooh, yes, I know you can do that with ebooks. I get it. But sometimes you do want that special version
yeah,
as well. And again, you want the gift. You're like, oh my God, a gift. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I just got it at the airport bookshop, which again, you get the bookshop that has some books and has a cash register, but that has the machine right there. And that's why back in 2009, that's why I invested in the machine, because I remembered saying, sure, Amazon can ship in 24 hours, but I'll get it to you in 15 minutes. And I
yeah,
was getting annoyed that I was losing special orders, right? Because getting books shipped in, especially from warehouses in the US into Canada, could take a week or so, or at least 3 or 4 days, and Amazon could deliver the next day. And you're like, oh, how do we one up them?
yeah,
By the way, just a tip, if you've ever encountered, and there are espresso book machines, there's numerous ones in New York City and Shakespeare and Company and other bookstores around the world. But there's probably only about 300 machines in existence now. There were, I think I had the ninth in the world and the second in Canada back in the day. And that one's not even operational anymore. I'd love to buy it myself. I'd love to go and buy it from them if I could, but
yeah,
maybe I can get it at a discount. But if you publish your book through Ingram, through Lightning Source, or through Draft to Digital Print or Publish Drive, I'll use Ingram Lightning Source. The book is available on demand at any one of those locations. And one of the coolest experiences in the world, Maddie, is you walk in. I've done this in Italy at one of their big bookshops there, Amonadori. One of the bookshops, I walked in and ordered one of my books that was printed on demand. And I did this when I was in New York a few years ago for a client of mine who had set up her book through Ingram Spark. And I took a video of her book being printed in a bookstore in Manhattan.
that's so
So it's
cool.
one of the coolest things you can do is going in and requesting one of your books and seeing if they can print it and then watching it come out of the machine.
Yeah, that
So
is
a
cool.
really cool thing that you can try.
And I can imagine it won't be too long, for this imaginary book machine, would you could go in and say, "I want James Patterson, but I want it in French,"
Yeah.
you
Yeah. The
know?
translated version. Like, why
Yeah,
not? Right. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Very cool. So that was one of mine. Do you have what? I'm gonna say my other thing that I would like, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you and ask you if
yeah.
there what you would like to see in the next couple of 100 episodes. And the other thing that's kind of like I would not think this would be technically difficult, but writing software that lends itself more specifically to co-authoring.
Oh,
Because
wow. That's true.
yeah, because you and I have been through this, Michael Aran and I have been
Michael.
through this,
Yeah.
that it's like, "You know what? I just staring at the Google Doc and I'm not feeling inspired."
Yeah.
Or I'm passing back and forth a Scrivener
Yeah.
file or a Word file or something like that, and every time a co-authored book comes up, I do the research and I'm like, "I'm still not seeing anything that is really very good for co-authoring."
Well, speaking of co-authoring, that inspires me to something. I mean, I pushed really hard for Drive to Digital to create payment splitting because of the challenges and,
Yeah,
the challenges of, okay, what about outside of the places Drive to Digital publishes? How do you handle payment splitting? Okay, Publish Drive has a really sexy calculator you can use, but you still have to do the calculations, not the hard part. It's the getting the data and figuring it out and saying, okay, 18 cents here and 13 cents there and $15 there and put it all together. And how do I get that money to my
yeah,
co-authors? So I would love to see a solution that could allow for collaboration. And what do you do with the money at the end of the day? Instead
yeah,
of, in the old traditional publishing model, it always comes to the publisher and then the publisher has to divvy it up. Well, that's huge labor and time, but I have a company that actually, and I understand they're going to take a cut. That's part of the business model. But having a company that could help with that processing, no matter how the book is published, you just put in all your inputs and go, okay, all right, Maddie's my co-author here. Anytime it sells, I don't have to go and do these. I have this with you, with Joanna Penn, with a whole bunch of different authors where either I'm running the report and saying, oh, I owe you this much money, or you're running the report and you have that labor is just ridiculous. So just having some sort of system where we can just plug the things in, kind of like, scribe count, the way you just go, boop, 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 boop.
yeah,
You don't actually have my passwords. You just know you have the data, run this process. and everyone gets paid directly, like direct deposit or whoever the easiest payment system is. And then you can go, oh, you just saved me a lot of hassle.
Yeah, I have to say that the last time I thought I was gonna be able to turn the payment of the relatively small number of platforms that I have with you and with Michael that aren't handled by the draft digital royalty splitting. I'd run through it with my assistant once, and then she'd be able to take it from there. The time after, like, 2 hours, she and I were like I said, "I'm just gonna send them both a really large check and say, 'Can I please never have to pay you this relatively small amount of money again?'" 'Cause it's a mess, it's a mess. Yeah, that would be a lovely thing to see in the future.
I think that's going to be the next phase because, as I've often said, indie authors today are no different than the big publishers of 100 years ago. We're all doing the same things. And so, if we can build technologies that can help us build in a way that stops us from moving forward because we spent so much time doing the paperwork,
Yeah,
we can really take this industry to brave new worlds.
yeah. Mark, any other things that you would like to add that you would like to see over the next, 2, 4 years?
Yeah, so here's something that I've experimented with, and I don't even know if I've talked to you about this yet, but I've loved the idea. You talked about custom editions. Oh, James Patterson, but in this language and stuff like that, right? I've loved the idea of having numerous versions of audiobooks. You can have them read by different people, where you get micropayments. And 11 Labs, I have a professional voice with 11 Labs now, and they're 11reader.io, which is a book where you can buy, I put up a couple of my ebooks there. When you get my ebook there, you have the ebook, but you also can have it read to you by, and you can pick the voice. So you can have it
Yeah.
read to you by my professional voice clone, or you can have Burt Reynolds read it or a whole bunch of whatever. Maddie, I've already made about $35 on licensing my voice,
Huh!
my AI voice. And but I love the idea of giving you the choice. Like, do you want to hear a sole narration version or do you want to hear a multicast? Oh, and I'd love to hear this read by Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And that sort of thing. Because some of the characters I imagined when I was creating my characters, a lot of it's kind of like a Ryan Reynolds, and this is kind of like a Amy Adams or whatever. Like those are the people you sometimes have in mind when you're creating your characters as a baseline. And you're like, wouldn't it be cool to hear them, to hear the dialogue in those voices, which I'm hearing a lot more, right? The Harry Bosch and the Renee Ballard novels by Michael Connolly, the audiobooks are done duet. And so when the character is speaking in the other character's voice, that the female character is narrating, but Harry Bosch speaks, you actually hear Titus Welliver,
oh, wow.
right?
That's very
And you
cool.
actually hear Christine when in Titus's chapters where he's reading Harry Bosch. So I'm curious to see how we're going to be able to take that to the next level
Yeah.
in a way that pays the talent for their, even and again, micropayments. It was micropayments with cost per checkout. I remember on cheap. Let's go back to your short story thing. It was my mini short story collections that were 15,000, 18,000 words that were like an hour or 45 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes. I was making my money not from Audible on those books, but on cost per checkouts. I was making micropayments on checkouts for those books and made my money back for my investment. And it's those micropayments that really can be powerful. Again, like in a month, I made $35
Yeah.
licensing for giving like you can use my voice. Go for it.
So cool. Well, Mark, as always, it is lovely to talk to you. I am so happy that you joined me for Landmark episode 300. And I'm looking forward to getting in touch with you again in 2 years or so and asking you to join me for Landmark episode 400. And
For
so
sure.
please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
But you can find links to all my socials, etc., from markleslie.ca, and that's for both the Mark Leslie guy and the Mark Leslie Lefebvre industry business guy, and that's the podcast and everything. And Maddie, happy anniversary, happy 300th anniversary. My goodness, we're not spring chickens anymore, are we?
No, but still having fun at it.
That's right.